Hello YouTube, happy not Sunday. It was actually funny, I was going to, I think I made reference in the last video I did, and some of you have checked it out, so thank you for that. I made reference to in the last video that I was going to make a Sunday randoms video, and I didn't get around to it. Unfortunately, Sunday again ended up being kind of busy, but at the same time, by the time the video published, I think by the time it actually got uploaded, it was already early Sunday morning. So technically you did get a Sunday randoms video. And the entire latter portion of the video after the pickups, I would say qualifies as a Sunday random topic. So this one I'm just going to call not Sunday randoms. So, because this one really would fall under what I would normally put in my Sunday randoms video. But with the long weekend and happy holidays, for those of you out there. So in Canada it's Labor Day, and I believe in the US it's Memorial Day, so Memorial Day long weekend, so happy Memorial Day, or happy Labor Day, wherever you happen to be. And if you're somewhere else in the world, then happy Monday. So I guess it really depends on whereabouts you're checking this out. I'm kind of watching the college football game. I'm watching a little Notre Dame and Louisville playing in the evening game here. Checking it out. So a couple of things I wanted to talk about that I didn't get around to. Oh, and by the way, as far as the, like I said, as far as the long weekend is concerned, cheers to you. So I did want to talk a few more things about, I did want to focus on a couple more specifics. So my last video after the pickups really focused in on and keyed in on the whole Slabgate thing. This one is not really going to be related to that, but it is peripherally related to that. It's more of a philosophy question. And there is no right or wrong answer. This one's more of an open dialogue, kind of an open question that I put out to you. But I will kind of explain my thought process on it, where I stand on it. And you'll have to excuse me if I do look up from time to time. There is some stuff on the screen. Oh, by the way, also my face will probably change colors depending on what my big screen is doing on there. Multitasking a little bit. You gotta have your multiple screens going. But when it comes to collecting, my thought process, and hopefully this come across in some of the videos if you checked out any of my other stuff before, I really think it is a very personal thing. But I think leaving things, trying to make blanket rules or blanket statements don't work. Because when you try to set yourself up and put yourself in a certain position like that, where this is the rule, this is the way it is, and it applies to everybody, it leaves out a whole segment of the hobby, and I don't really think that works. So the reason why this is peripherally related to the Slabgate thing is that the specific alteration that a lot of these, a lot of these Slabgate things come into is trimming. And one caveat I'll make, which is kind of the similar type of caveat I've made in a lot of my other videos, is that I will never excuse altering a card with the intention of deception. Truthfully, you shouldn't be altering a card at all. There's really no good rationale as a collector why you would do that. And as a dealer, you really have no rationale for doing that either. It isn't like some other, hobbies or things where you can say, oh, preservation. You can't really make that excuse because trimming a card doesn't preserve it in any way. So you're altering not the composition of the card because it's still made out of the same stuff. And that'll kind of lead into my whole thought process on how that particular alteration is treated. But the reality is that when you make a change to the card and change it from its original condition, you are changing the provenance to it. You've suddenly diverted it from its original path, whatever it was going to be. Cards are made out of paper and cardboard. Even if you try your best, unless you are able to keep them in pristine condition, and anyone who works at a library or an archive where they're trying to keep old books and things like that intact, they know that there's only certain weather conditions certain climate conditions that you have to maintain in order. The paper will degrade over time. It's going to happen. Eventually, it will, unless it's maintained in kind of that pristine, cool, dry area, it's going to eventually disintegrate. It won't probably be within our lifetime unless you happen to be in a particularly bad place, but there's going to be degradation. Degradation, I should say. English words. But as these things degrade, it will be over the course of time. But as soon as you start doing things to it, you're altering the path that the card would otherwise have taken. And that's, I think, where a lot of folks have a problem. But I think they take kind of a puritanical view on it. And one of the things that I noticed a lot when I was looking at the forums is that, they establish that once the card has been altered and that it's altered, well, then that's it. You might as well just take the thing, and this is one of those little contest cards, but you might as well take the thing and just go, tear it up. It's gone forever. No, I don't think so. I think the reality is that there are some cards, especially vintage cards, or even some low-numbered cards. Well, yeah, as soon as you've done that, you have now altered it. You can't try to misrepresent it. I think the key element here is not just the deception. It is disclosure. Disclosure, I think, is the magic word here that doesn't excuse, but disclosure leaves it in a position where now the collector can make a judgment call. As long as things are disclosed properly, again, it won't excuse it, but it will leave there is a market for some of these cards, even after an alteration has happened, if things are properly disclosed. And I've got my own idea, which I'll mention in this video, of what I think the third-party graders could do to kind of do a better job, to actually be a service when it comes to cards like this. One other thing I'll mention before I get too deep into it is that there is a video upcoming that should probably be interesting. I saw it on my phone earlier. There's going to be a video from Vintage Card Curator. So I'm actually going to show you there. I don't know if you'll be able to make that out. So this one is showing as an upcoming. So it's a provocative title, to say the least. You know, PSA, incompetent or complicit. I say, why not both? So by the time I bring this video out, this one is going to be probably tomorrow. So it'll be probably on Tuesday. It's the 3rd at 8 p.m. my time, so Eastern Standard Time. I will be very interested in seeing Vintage Card Curator's angle on this. I'm subscribed to his channel, so I'll definitely want to check that one out. Generally speaking, the videos that he does are very good, so I will be interested to see his angle on it, given that he is a collector of a lot of different vintage cards, and that perspective will definitely be an interesting one. So let's talk a little bit about trimmed cards. And I'm going to use an example here. So I got one of my binders, and I'm going to pull a couple of cards out of it to try to make a point here. And I want to make clear that this is not a be-all and end-all on any type, but I do want to make sure that we give the proper perspective to something. So it's going to be a little bit of story time, and I'll explain as we go along. So I want to show you a card. This is from 1952 Topps. Sorry, 1952 Bowman. Let me correct myself. So this is from the 1952 Bowman series, and I'm going to show you the card, and then I want you to take a moment, I want you to look at it, and then I'll explain a couple of things about these cards. So this is the 1952 Bowman card of Bobby Thompson. So that's the front. Now let me show you the back. Now hopefully you can figure out something pretty quickly from this card. I'll wait a moment. Can you see what it is? Show you the back again. I'm being a bit facetious. You should be able to make it out pretty much instantaneously. You kind of understand where I'm going with this. So this card is trimmed. Now, what's fun about it is that it's trimmed in such a way where I don't think anyone could accuse... If I put this up on eBay right now, no one would really accuse me necessarily. Now, you should still disclose, you know, what it is, but at the same time, I don't think anyone could accuse you of misrepresenting this, unless you genuinely know nothing about this issue. What actually happened is I bought this as part of a lot of 1952 Bowman's card on eBay years ago. And what happened with that is that the seller did disclose right on it, and it was kind of obvious, but they did disclose. They said that apparently they bought it as part of a collection, and at some point the collector that had previously had it many years ago, whoever had these cards originally, and it was well over 100 of them, and they all were in the same shape. Basically what happened was, for whatever reason, they got it in their head to trim the card to the size of a 1950 Bowman, which, if you know anything about that, is more of a square, which kind of matches up to the dimensions that these cards now reside in. And as you can see from looking at the back, and specifically focusing in, if you look at the bottom part, it definitely cuts off a piece of the bottom. So obviously there's no, you know, whereas you got the board, what little white borders or off-white gray borders there, there's obviously none at the top and none at the bottom. It's very clear and obvious. So the reason why I'm saying is that I don't think anyone would accuse you of anything with those cards is that it is so obvious, the trimming itself, is that you really couldn't try to represent it as something other than what it is, even if you wanted to. And I'll actually use a different card in my little binder here as an example to help. So by comparison to Bobby Thompson, here is a Joe Adcock. So you can see the card there. So that's a regular card from that set. And now you can see, like, if I put the Bobby Thompson on top of it, it's not even close. You know, I couldn't make it much more obvious. This is a situation, you don't need a ruler for this one. And I'm using this extreme example to kind of make a point. The point is this. This card would be original, unaltered. It's just a card. It's nothing special. Joe Adcock, 1952 Bowman. It's a decent enough card. That's Bobby Thompson. In and of itself, wasn't necessarily anything special. And now it is obviously in much lower condition because it's been trimmed. It's been altered, obviously. The alteration is obvious and clear to any reasonable person. Here's the thing. You can put this on eBay and sell it. There is still a market for it. The market would be vastly, vastly, vastly reduced. But since it is so obvious, and in this situation you really have anything short of disclosing it would be you just lying to try to sell it to a buyer. You don't need a ruler for this one to figure it out. If you know anything about the issue, you know it shouldn't be a square. That's why I'm saying that this one is a little bit more clear-cut than a lot of the examples that are being done in that forum post, where you're taking maybe a 1/16 of an inch off, something that is small enough where you kind of have to look at it a little bit more closely to pick it up. Whereas this is plain and obvious to any reasonable person. You can eyeball that, and if you can eyeball it, it's pretty clear-cut. And just to finish it off, I'll do one more time, just so you can see again the difference. So the Bobby Thompson ends right about here, and the other card just keeps going. Again, very clear cut. Why would I even buy that? Maybe is the follow-up question. So, short answer, I'm thinking, at the time that I bought it, I was thinking about kicking around the idea, and I've mentioned this in a previous video, one of the thoughts that I had in my head was eventually putting together a little run. And I think I'm still going to put together maybe a run of all the Bowman cards from 48 to 55. I've got the 55 Bowman set completed, and I've got the 54 Bowman mostly completed. I've got maybe about 30 cards left to finish that one off. And then I'd like to tackle 53. I'd like to tackle 52. Now here's the thing. Over 100 of my cards are in kind of this shape right now. So if I completed the set, even with these in it, I would consider it complete. I'd be perfectly okay with that. I, as the collector, have made a conscious choice that I am okay with that. And I wasn't the only person to bid on this lot. And I'm sure they weren't bidding on it to alter it in order to try to put it in a PSA holder and fool anybody. Because if you're trying to fool somebody with this, well, you're not a card doctor. You're a magician. At that point, you've literally made matter appear out of nothing. You can't easily try to alter this and make it into something that's this dimension. It's not going to happen. So you're not trying to fool anybody. You've just decided that I'm okay with that. I can live with it. It's not that big a deal to me. In the long run, I would probably then try to eventually swap out some of the cards for cards of the normal size, even if they're not in as nice. The condition on a lot of these cards, the picture on it still looks really good, which is why it's kind of a shame. If they had not trimmed these, I'm sure they could have got a pretty penny for the lot that I bought. And I don't remember exactly how many it was, but I feel like it was maybe 120 or 130 different 1952 Bowman cards. A really nice starter lot, including some star players and including some semi-stars. Basically a lot that would cost much, much, much more. I don't remember exactly what I paid for it, but I'm pretty sure it was under $1 a card. So the point is that I got a really good price compared to what it would have been had these been in their original condition, even if they were lower grade. With all that said, if I then try to build it up as a collection and then try to sell it to somebody, well, they would give me pennies on the dollar compared to the normal price, because you have to factor in the grades. So technically speaking, this is a poor condition card, even if the eye appeal is decent, because you're missing material on the card. There's no question. So you can't treat it the same way that you would even another card where it's complete. So you have to factor that in. The point though is disclosure, because we know that in advance. The bidders, including myself, were able to make a decision of what am I comfortable paying given what I know about these cards. I know that they have been altered. I know that they are no longer in their original condition, therefore I'm willing to pay this. Now with modern cards, it takes on a completely different complexion. These are vintage cards. These are 1952 Bowmans. It's not like they're growing on trees or not out there in the millions. Where do you draw the line is basically kind of it. In a modern card, where it's not a numbered card, where it's not super, super limited, I could totally understand why at that point you kind of would reject the card out of hand. Because there are other copies that you can get that are not compromised. You would prefer to have those over the altered version. And even if it was fully disclosed, it still wouldn't sit right with a lot of collectors, and therefore would very vastly reduce the desirability in the marketplace. You can't even deny that. It's just not going to be as interesting to collectors, knowing full well that there is unaltered versions out there. The problem, and what I alluded to in the last video, was that as soon as PSA started grading some of them and not taking the time to really check them more carefully, as soon as some trimmed cards make it into the holders, it brings to question all the other ones. The problem you run into with modern cards is not so much the regular non-serial numbered, high production cards. What you really run into, the problem, is, so say it's a limited parallel card of a key rookie out of 10 or out of 5. The second you alter one, well, now there's 4 good ones or 9 good ones. And you don't know that for sure either. Maybe some of the other ones have been touched up as well. It's hard to tell. And with a modern issue, I think collectors are less forgiving. And understandably so. But the question becomes, oh, will they never have any value after that? Not necessarily, because if it really is that limited, you're not going to get another copy, and it's not like the manufacturer can replace it for you. If you're a hardcore collector of a certain player and there's only 5 copies out there and the other 4 are accounted for, I don't know, what do you do with the 5th one? The 5th one that's been altered, what happens with that one? Someone may still want it for their collection because they don't have an alternative option. One of the other ones just simply isn't available. At that point, does it excuse it? No, it doesn't. Does it change the fact that you're going to have to, at every stage of, every time it changes hands, you're going to have to disclose it? No, you're still going to have to disclose it. It needs to be known that this card is not in its original state. So what about suggestions? So here's my suggestion. I think the third-party graders have dropped the ball in the sense that they left themselves in this position because they are in the business of making money. And because they're in the business of making money, they never gave enough personnel, enough training, but also more importantly, enough time. It's not even training per se. Some of the stuff is really easy to pick up on. But if you don't take the time to really look at it, and you don't have enough time to really look at it because you need to get through a certain amount of volume in a day, well then you're not going to be able to put in the correct amount of work to make sure that you've done your diligence and make sure that you measure things correctly. And the other problem I foresee, in my opinion, is that in today's world, even if they catch a card that they believe, and there are cards that are perfectly legitimate that have been pulled out of packs, they get that minimum size requirement, they get back the little minimum size requirement thing. What happens though is that in that scenario, all that happens is that you get back the little label showing that, but then you get it back in basically a card saver. And then you're welcome to try to resubmit it again if you want to. And with more modern cards, if I pull a card out of a pack and I get that, well then I know it's not minimum size requirement because it came out of the pack. Now, I know the provenance because I pulled it from the pack in that scenario. So I would then resubmit it. PSA then gets to make another grading fee to take another look at it. And maybe the second time they agree with you and they actually put it in a holder. What I think would probably be, there's 2 things that I think probably PSA should consider doing. I'm using PSA as the example because they're the biggest one. But what I would consider doing in their position. One would be encapsulate it anyway. But encapsulate it with a label that clearly outlines what the alteration is in your opinion. If it doesn't meet the minimum size requirement, then label it as altered, trimmed. Just put that on the label. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody couldn't crack it out and then try to resubmit it if they were a card doctor. Then, of course they can. But they can do that now. So it's not like not putting it in that holder prevents it. And then charge them the normal grading fee. Now, you're still going to really irritate the person who actually pulled it from a pack and it's legitimate, but for some reason it didn't meet the size requirement. But there's only so much you can do about that, and that's a separate issue. Where I think there would be some value in doing that is if the card doctor keeps getting it in these holders, at the very least the holder makes clear and encapsulates the card and makes it clear on the label what the issue is. So if the card has been recolored or if any other type of alteration is in there, you include it in there. Coins do this right now. So if you find that a coin has been cleaned, it's on the label for a lot of the big manufacturers. So they mention it in there. And they'll still give what the technical grade is, given whatever it is, but it'll not be treated in the same way. So the marketplace will not treat the coin that has been cleaned, and it's clearly labeled as such, but at least you have that disclosure. And I think there's value to that. The second thing that I would do, also kind of stealing from the coin grading side of things, would be to offer a value-added service to the collector. And I would make this optional. But I would have a little checkbox where for a little additional fee, you could have your card professionally scanned. And the reason I would do this is because it would give you kind of an excuse. If I was PSA, what I would do is I would institute it as an optional feature, but I would then use that as an excuse to invest in a machine or something where you could do those high resolution scans, like a proper scanner that you could do, and do it quickly for a lot of different cards. But then what I would do is I would scan every single card that comes in anyway. So if you hit the checkbox, then you would, you'd have a way maybe through a portal, your login or whatever, you could download these high resolution images. You could use them for eBay lots, especially for higher end cards and all that. There's a value add there. But by doing this, you've also opened the door for intentionally scanning every single card that comes in the door. The reason why that's valuable to you. So for like a lot of regular cards, so I'll use this as an example. So say for some reason this Bobby Thompson card, say I submitted it and it's And I am a magician, and somehow I can put, you know, cardboard back onto this. But the point is that you scan this, high resolution scan, and you've got all the, you know, indicators and everything into it. If I resubmit this later on, at least you've got a reference point potentially as a grader. Now, for this card, it probably wouldn't be worth trying. But where it might be worthwhile would be on a, you know, T206 Honus Wagner. There's not that many of them floating around. So you'd have a database on hand to be able to go and look at those high resolution scans and give your graders something to help them potentially identify something that may have come in the past. So that's one. But then also two, where it's more useful, I would say, serial number cards. For serial numbered cards, having that scan means that if number 6 of 10 comes in and it was an 8 before because it had chipped edges or something, and then suddenly the exact same serial number card comes back in, you already have the high resolution scan of your PSA. You're able to go, wait a minute, before it was an 8. Why is it now a 9 or a 10? Because it's the same serial number, the same card, and we have it in our database. It takes the guessing game out of it, because at that point with the serial number, for the serial number cards especially, as soon as you've got it in the database with the high resolution graphics, you've solved that part of the problem. For non-serial number cards, you're still going to have a little bit of judgment. You're going to be looking for certain indicators and things. That's basically what the folks in the Blowout Cards forum were doing anyway. They were looking at the cards and trying to find, well, there was a spot here and a print spot over here, and previously there was this thing here, and that's how I know this is the same card as this one. There's still some subjectivity to that because there can be some inconsistencies in manufacturing, but at least with some of those indicators on a good size scan, it gives you something to go off of. So in conclusion, lest I be going to well into 20-minute territory again, long story short, I think there are ways to fix it. I don't think the hobby is going to throw away PSA because, like I said, a lot of these people that are impacted by this and are really outraged by it are a relatively small minority. I don't think that it's going to basically reset the whole marketplace, this scandal and its related items. For some people it's going to reverberate, it's really going to mess with them, I get it. But at the same time, for a lot of collectors, there's ignorance is bliss and they're not going to really notice. But what I would still suggest is that for those of you that are outraged, maybe parlay it into something actionable. I think in the long run, it would be useful for PSA and SGC and BGS and all of them to kind of adopt a couple of those things that I mentioned. The high resolution images I think could actually be useful. Now, those same people would be like, oh, make them available to us. Maybe, maybe not. I could understand why you would want that. But at the very least, they should have it, is what I'm trying to say. They should have a database, because then at least, like I said, for some serial number cards and for some high-value cards, I want to know what the population of 52 tops manuals that are floating around are, because that's a high enough value card that I would like to know the provenance. And if this card has been resubmitted multiple times to the different services, having that image and being able to look at those indicators would be a huge thing to help you figure out. And it would give those overworked graders, because some of them really are overworked given what they have to do in the little amount of time. Some of it is just good old-fashioned human error. It were really easy, I think, to jump to the conspiratorial, you know, everybody's in on it. I think a lot of folks at PSA are just doing their jobs, and they're not doing them as well as they could because they're basically being told, look, you got 30 seconds. Figure it out. 30 seconds, go. And then get on to the next one. And if you're doing that for long enough in a day, you're going to make mistakes. The likelihood is you're not going to go out and measure these cards. And that's kind of the problem, is that if it's a 1/16 of an inch off and you're not measuring it and you're just eyeballing, you've been staring at these things all day, if it's not obvious to you, you're not looking at it again. You're quickly going to assign it. How are the corners? Looks good. How are the edges? Looks fine. How's the centering? Okay, good. There's a 9. There's a 10. Whatever. In the long term, though, having a database like that would be really useful. Now, I do agree that it would probably be even more useful if it was available for collectors and people to be able to access, and for themselves to be able to do the same kind of research that it would give the grader the chance to do. I think for some really high value cards, though, I think it's critical that the graders have access to this information so that they can do their jobs better, so that when you, as the buyer, are buying some of these higher value cards, you can have the confidence that at least some of this is being done. And for serial numbered modern cards, that is where this can at least help. It won't prevent, because as I mentioned in the previous video, wherever there's money to be made, someone will always try. And it doesn't even have to be a super high value card. It's just wherever there's an edge to be taken, it will be taken. But you can still use technology to try to help you make it more difficult for folks that are trying. And that, I think, is about the best you can do. But at the same time, my other conclusion is that for folks that are really being militant about a lot, just remember, some of these cards, even after the alterations happen, still have a marketplace, because there are still some cards where there's still a collector who still wants to collect that set, wants to collect that player, or wants to collect that card, and decided at some point that they would rather have, and we'll use an extreme example, they would rather have an altered, recolored 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle than to not have one at all. Because maybe the other ones that are available are so far out of reach that they're not even something they can even consider touching. And whether you want to accept it or not, you know, trimming a card or recoloring a card isn't altering the chemical composition of the card. It's still physically the same card. I think giving the collector the choice to figure it out for themselves is probably still the best way to go. As long as the collectors still get the number one most important thing, which is they need to have the disclosure. They need to have the information to be able to decide for themselves. The problem is here, as it's always been. It's where someone decides to do something like this, and you as the buyer don't know. And you're buying something that you think is one thing when it's really something else. And that lack of disclosure is really the biggest problem, even though there's other problems related to it, and solutions may not be forthcoming. So I would say embrace the technology and see if that will help. It won't guarantee anything, but at least it gives something. With that said, hopefully that kind of conveys a few thoughts. There's kind of my not-so-Sunday randoms, a little video, another epic. I'm getting really good at these 20-minute videos. I'm pretty sure I cleared 20 minutes again. So as always, thanks again for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.